A wounded bear emerged from the forest and made its way toward a group of hikers. When the hikers saw what it was carrying, they were left speechless. The first rays of dawn filtered through the thick canopy of lodgepole pines, casting a soft golden light on the ground. The fresh scent of pine and earth mingled with the cool morning air, embodying the raw beauty of Yellowstone National Park. Clara Morgan adjusted the straps of her well-worn backpack, the dirt trail crunching under her boots as she walked. Her fingers brushed the rough bark of a nearby tree, taking in the tranquility of the surroundings. Clara was familiar with the wild. As a wildlife conservationist, she had spent years exploring environments like this, studying animals in their natural habitats and fighting for their protection. But today she was simply a hiker, visiting Yellowstone to find peace amidst its vastness. Behind her, her old college friends, Sarah, Nate, and Lily, chatted excitedly, their voices blending with the rhythm of their steps. It was their first time in Yellowstone, and they were captivated by the stunning scenery, pointing out bison grazing and eagles soaring overhead. Clara walked a little ahead, attuned to the delicate sounds of the forest. The chatter behind her was comforting, but her focus remained on the wilderness, the rustling of leaves, the distant call of a bird. Nature had a language all its own, and Clara understood it well. The group paused at a clearing where the trail led to a rocky viewpoint. Below, the Lamar Valley unfolded, a sea of green dotted with bison. The view was awe-inspiring, a moment of pure wonder that made every step of the hike feel worthwhile. "This is unreal," Sarah said, pulling out her phone to take a photo. "How do you even describe something like this?" "You don't," Nate replied with a grin. "You just experience it." Clara smiled faintly but didn't respond. Her eyes were fixed on the valley, her trained gaze picking out small movements among the distant bison. A calf nuzzling its mother, a bull pawing at the ground. She could spend hours observing their behavior, but then she heard it, a noise that didn't fit. It was faint, barely audible beneath the rustling leaves, but it was enough to make Clara's stomach tighten. A low, throaty growl followed by the snap of branches. Her muscles tensed. "Did you hear that?" Sarah whispered, her phone lowering. Clara nodded, her voice steady but urgent. "Don't move. Stay still." The group fell silent, the calm of the forest replaced by a growing tension. Another growl rumbled through the trees, louder this time, accompanied by the unmistakable sound of something large moving through the underbrush. Clara turned slowly, her heart racing as the noise drew closer. The trees swayed slightly, their branches rustling, and then a shadow emerged. A bear. The bear stepped onto the trail, moving cautiously, its walk uneven. It was enormous, its fur dark and matted with dirt and blood. Clara's breath caught in her throat. She had encountered bears before, but this one was different. It wasn't moving with the usual predator's grace, nor was it posturing defensively. It was limping. "Clara?" Sarah's voice barely broke the silence, shaking with fear. "Don't run," Clara whispered, her voice calm despite the tension in her chest. "Stay still. Don't make a sound." The bear's head was low, its shoulders hunched as it moved closer. Clara's gaze shifted to its front leg, which dragged slightly with each step. Jagged wounds marred the limb, the blood shining in the light. But what truly stopped Clara in her tracks was what the bear was carrying in its mouth, a limp bundle of fur, dark and soaked. Clara's heart sank. This was a cub. "What is that?" Nate asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's her baby," Clara murmured, her heart heavy with sorrow. The bear stopped a few feet away, its dark eyes meeting Clara's. There was no aggression in them, no territorial challenge, only desperation. Clara had seen that look before. Animals who had lost everything, yet still clung to the hope of one last chance. Clara took a step forward, her hands open at her sides. "It's okay," she said softly, though she wasn't sure if she was reassuring the bear or herself. "Clara, what are you doing?" Sarah hissed. "That's a bear. You can't—" "She's not going to hurt us," Clara interrupted, her eyes never leaving the bear. "Look at her. She's asking for help." The words hung in the air, improbable yet undeniable. The bear didn't growl or charge. Instead, it lowered its head and gently placed the cub on the ground before stepping back, moving slowly and deliberately, as if it understood the need for space. Clara knelt, her hands trembling as she reached for the cub. Its body was limp, its fur slick with blood and dirt. She placed her fingers on its chest, feeling for a heartbeat. It was faint, but it was there. "It's alive," Clara said, a wave of relief flooding her, but barely. "What are you going to do?" Lily asked, her voice pale with fear. Clara didn't answer right away. She reached into her backpack for a small first aid kit, quickly scanning the supplies: water, gauze, antiseptic. It wasn't much, but it was all she had. The mother bear stood a few feet away, her dark eyes locked on Clara. Clara worked swiftly, cleaning the cub's wounds and using a dropper to give it a few sips of water. "You're going to be okay," Clara whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She wasn't just talking to the cub, she was talking to the mother, to herself, to the fragile connection between them. The hikers stood back, their fear giving way to awe as they watched this astonishing moment unfold. A wild animal, a predator, trusting a human. The cub let out a weak squeak, shifting slightly. Clara's heart swelled with hope, though urgency still gripped her. She glanced at the mother bear, whose eyes never left her cub. For a moment, Clara felt the immense weight of the wilderness around them. This wasn't just about the bear's desperation, it was a deeper, unspoken bond between species, transcending fear. Clara knew she couldn't let them down. The forest was eerily silent, the usual sounds of wildlife replaced by an overwhelming stillness. Clara remained crouched by the cub, her hand resting gently on its fragile body. The hikers shifted uneasily behind her, their whispers hushed by the gravity of the moment. Even the massive mother bear stayed still, her gaze never leaving Clara. Clara took a slow breath, steadying her hands. She knew the risks, but doing nothing wasn't an option. The cub's body was still weak, its tiny paws twitching as if testing its strength. She reached for her water bottle, carefully unscrewing the cap, aware of the mother bear's watchful eyes. "It's okay," Clara murmured. "I'm just going to help her." She offered a few drops of water from the cap, and after a moment the cub's tongue flicked out, catching the liquid. Clara offered more, hopeful but cautious. "Is she going to make it?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. Clara didn't look back. "I don't know. She's in shock and dehydrated, but we have to try." The cub stirred faintly, stretching its tiny limbs. Clara's heart lifted slightly, but she kept her focus, scanning for other injuries. A small puncture wound near the cub's shoulder caught her eye. She carefully cleaned it with a sterile wipe, wincing as the cub whimpered. "It's okay, little one," she whispered. "You're safe now." As Clara worked, she couldn't ignore the mother's wounds. The deep gash on her front leg was swollen and raw, the surrounding fur clumped with dried blood. Clara's jaw tightened. She had seen wounds like this before, likely from a steel-jawed trap. Poachers and careless hunters ignored park regulations, and it made Clara furious. "She's hurt too," Nate murmured. "What do we do about her?" Clara paused, her eyes meeting the mother bear's dark gaze. The animal's breathing was heavy, labored. The wound needed attention, but Clara couldn't approach directly. Doing so could provoke an aggressive response. "I need to get closer," Clara said quietly, almost to herself. "Are you crazy?" Sarah hissed. "That's a wild, injured bear. You've already done enough. Why not wait for the rangers?" Clara shook her head. She might not have that long, if the wound gets infected. Her voice trailed off, the gravity of the situation pressing on her. Slowly, Clara pulled a small bottle of antiseptic spray and a roll of gauze from her pack. She moved carefully, her heart pounding in her chest. The mother bear tensed, but Clara didn't back away. She crouched a few feet away and extended her hand, palm up, to offer reassurance. "I'm not going to hurt you," Clara whispered. "I just want to help." The bear's gaze flicked from the items in Clara's hand to her face, and for a moment the air was thick with tension. Then, to Clara's surprise, the bear relaxed slightly, lowering her head to the ground. Clara took this as permission, moving closer to treat the wound. The bear flinched as the antiseptic hit the raw flesh, but she didn't pull away, only growling softly. "I know it stings," Clara said gently, "but it'll help." She wrapped the gauze around the leg, securing it as best as she could. When she finished, the bear lifted her head and met Clara's gaze. There was an unspoken understanding in those eyes. Clara returned to the group, her body still trembling with adrenaline. The hikers stood in stunned silence, awe written on their faces. "You're insane," Sarah said, though there was admiration in her voice. "That was incredible." "She let you touch her," Nate marveled. "Why would she do that?" "She knows," Clara said quietly. "She knows we're her only chance." The cub let out a weak cry, drawing Clara's attention back. It was trying to stand, its strength returning. "We can't leave them here," Clara said firmly. "The cub is too fragile, and the mother's injury is too severe. We need to get help." Nate quickly grabbed his satellite phone, dialing as the group stood nearby, a unified sense of purpose replacing their earlier fear. Clara stayed close to the bears, her presence a silent promise that they weren't alone. As they waited, Clara couldn't help but reflect on the connection she had witnessed. Years of studying nature had taught her many lessons, but this moment blurred the lines between predator and protector, wild and human, in a way she had never known before. The mother bear exhaled softly, her exhausted eyes never leaving Clara. The cub nestled closer to her side, its tiny chest rising and falling with each fragile breath. Clara let out a slow breath of her own, the weight of the moment settling in. "You came to the right place," Clara whispered, her voice barely audible. "We'll take care of you." The distant sound of an engine grew louder, signaling the arrival of help. Clara could feel the forest slowly coming back to life, the world resuming its natural rhythm. But in that clearing, the line between life and death had never felt so thin. Clara looked back at her friends, who had retreated a few steps, standing in quiet awe. Sarah, gripping her trekking pole tightly, exchanged a glance with Nate, who nervously watched the bears. "Clara," Sarah whispered, her voice tinged with worry, "the rangers are almost here. Should you move back? What if the bear—" "She won't," Clara reassured her gently, her voice calm despite the heavy tension. "She hasn't yet, and she won't now." Clara understood the risks of being so close to an injured bear, but she also knew that not all actions in the wild were born of aggression. The mother bear had made her choice, entrusting Clara with her cub. Now Clara had made her choice too. The cub let out a faint cry, its tiny body moving weakly against its mother. Clara's chest tightened with emotion. This was the sign she needed, a desperate plea for help. "I need to check on the cub again," Clara murmured, more to herself than anyone else. She reached into her backpack for the dropper and electrolyte solution, mixing it carefully. The mother bear lifted her head, watching Clara closely. "It's okay," Clara whispered softly. "I'm just helping." The bear let out a low rumble, almost like an acknowledgement. Clara took that as a sign to continue, offering the dropper to the cub. The cub's tiny tongue flicked out, taking the liquid. "You're doing great," Clara murmured, her voice thick with emotion. In that moment, it was just her, the cub, and the mother bear. The mother bear lowered her head again, her body trembling slightly. Clara noticed how the bandage on her injured leg was still holding, but the wound was looking worse, swollen and inflamed. The infection was a serious concern. "We can't wait much longer," Clara said quietly, her voice barely audible. "If the rangers don't arrive soon—" "What can we do?" Nate asked, anxiety creeping into his voice. Clara shook her head. "Right now, we wait. We just need to stay quiet and calm. The last thing we want is to startle her." The group nodded in silence, their faces etched with concern. Clara turned back to the bears, her body still except for the occasional adjustment of the dropper. The cub's cries grew slightly louder, a hopeful sign. Without warning, the mother bear lifted her head, leaning toward Clara. The intensity of her gaze made Clara freeze, her heart racing. For a brief moment, It felt as though the divide between human and animal disappeared, leaving only a shared understanding of survival. The distant rumble of an engine reached Clara's ears, signaling that help was on the way. She signaled the rangers, the sound of the truck growing louder. The mother bear shifted, her gaze still on Clara, as the truck finally came into view. The vehicle rolled to a stop, and two figures stepped out: Ranger Eli Perez, an experienced veteran, and Maya Grant, his young partner, who looked both nervous and amazed by the scene. "You weren't joking," Eli said quietly, his voice even as he surveyed the scene. "That's a massive one." Clara nodded and took a step closer. "She's hurt, likely from a trap. And the cub. It's barely holding on." Maya glanced at the bear, her face showing a mix of fear and awe. "She brought it to you?" Clara nodded again. "She's not being aggressive. She trusts us for now." Eli grunted, his gaze sharp as he studied the situation. "Trust doesn't go far with wild animals. We'll need to sedate her before we can transport her." Clara's stomach tightened. She understood the necessity, but the idea of using tranquilizers, potentially severing the fragile bond they had built, made her uneasy. "She's already stressed," Clara said, her tone firm. "If we can keep the sedation light just enough to move her safely into the truck—" Eli raised an eyebrow. "You really believe in this bear?" "She came to us," Clara replied, meeting his gaze. "She's acting out of desperation. If we're careful, we can keep her calm." Eli nodded slowly and turned to Maya. "Get the tranquilizer ready. Low dosage." Maya hesitated, then gathered the tranquilizer rifle and darts. Eli checked the dosage and approached the bear cautiously. "Stay back," he said. "Clara, you might want to—" "I'm staying," Clara interrupted, her voice steady. "She knows me. If she sees me, it might help." Eli studied her for a moment before nodding. "Your call. Just don't make any sudden moves." Clara crouched down again, speaking gently. "You'll feel a pinch, but it's okay. We're here to help." The bear's dark eyes stayed locked on Clara as Eli aimed the rifle. The dart hit her side with a soft thud, and she let out a low rumble, shifting slightly but not pulling away. "It'll take a minute," Eli said, lowering the rifle. "Just stay with her." Clara nodded, her eyes never leaving the bear. She watched as the tranquilizer began to take effect, the bear's movements slowing as her body relaxed. The cub, sensing the change, gave a small cry and nuzzled closer to its mother. "It's okay, little one," Clara whispered, her voice filled with emotion. "We've got you." Once the mother bear was fully sedated, Eli and Maya quickly moved to secure her in a transport crate. Clara helped guide the cub into a smaller carrier, her hands trembling as she assisted. "She's stable for now," Maya said, glancing at the mother bear, "but her leg, it's bad. She'll need immediate care." Eli nodded. "We'll get her to the center. They'll know what to do." The hikers watched in stunned silence, their fear giving way to relief and awe. Sarah wiped her eyes, her voice shaky. "I can't believe we just saw that. It's like she knew you'd help her." Clara didn't answer right away, her gaze fixed on the mother bear, who now appeared fragile and vulnerable, lying motionless in the crate. "It's not just about us helping her," Clara said softly. "It's about what she was willing to do for her cub. That kind of love, it's universal." The truck rumbled down the trail toward the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, and Clara sat in the back with the crates. Her hands rested lightly on the carriers, offering silent reassurance. As they neared the center, Clara spoke quietly to both bears. "You're going to be okay. We'll get you the help you need." Eli glanced back at her from the front seat. "You've got away with them," he remarked. "Most people wouldn't have made it this far." "It's not about me," Clara replied, her eyes on the bears. "It's about trust and survival. She trusted me because she had no other choice. Now, it's up to us not to let her down." Eli nodded thoughtfully. "Let's make sure we don't." When they arrived at the Yellowstone Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, Clara felt a wave of relief wash over her. The help they needed had finally arrived. Dr. Elena Ward, the lead veterinarian, came out to meet them. Her calm and steady demeanor was a welcome presence. Clara quickly briefed Elena on the situation. "She's sedated. The wound is severe, probably from a trap. The cub's weak but responding to fluids." Elena nodded, her expression serious but kind. "We'll take it from here. Stay close, though. You've been with them from the start, and that connection might be helpful." Clara watched as the team moved efficiently, unloading the bears and starting treatment. Despite the gravity of the situation, their movements had a quiet rhythm. The mother bear was transferred to a padded enclosure, and Clara stood outside, gripping the metal railing as she observed. Elena examined the bear's leg, her gloved hands gentle but precise. "This is deep," she murmured. "Looks like a trap injury, just as you said. The tissue is torn and there's early infection. We'll need to clean it thoroughly and stitch it up." Clara's chest tightened. "Can she recover?" Elena met her gaze. "She has a chance, but it depends on how well she responds to treatment. She's already been through a lot." Clara watched as the team worked swiftly, cleaning the wound and applying stitches. The mother bear stirred slightly under the sedation, a reminder of her strength. Despite everything, Clara felt a flicker of hope. She had done all she could, and now it was in the hands of the professionals. The morning light streamed through the trees, casting a warm glow across the center. Clara hadn't slept much, her mind too restless, but seeing the bears still fighting filled her with quiet awe. Dr. Elena entered the observation room. "She's doing better than expected," Elena said. "Her wound was serious, but her resilience is impressive. She's eating again, and the cub is nursing. Those are good signs." Clara exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the journey they had just completed and the long road ahead. A soft smile curved Clara's lips. Elena had called the bear a survivor, and Clara agreed, but the road ahead was still long. "She'll need weeks of care before we even think about releasing her," Elena said. "And the cub, though stronger, is still fragile." Clara nodded, the situation's gravity settling back in. "What can I do?" she asked, concern in her voice. Elena turned to her, her expression softening. "You've already done so much, Clara. But if you're willing, we could use your help with her rehabilitation. Your presence might help keep her calmer. Animals remember faces, voices. They know who helped them." Clara felt a surge of gratitude. "I'll do whatever I can." Over the next several days, Clara became an integral part of the mother bear's recovery. She spent hours by the enclosure, speaking gently to the bear while it ate or rested. The bear's dark eyes stayed fixed on Clara, watching her with quiet curiosity. It was a fragile trust, but it was there. The cub grew stronger, its tiny body filling out as it nursed and began moving more confidently. Clara marveled at its growing curiosity, watching it paw at blankets or nuzzle its mother. Every small movement felt like a victory. One afternoon, as Clara sat near the enclosure, the cub waddled over to the edge of the pen. Its round eyes blinked up at her, and Clara's breath caught in her throat. She crouched low, her hand resting lightly on the mesh. "Hey there, little one," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. The cub tilted its head and made a soft squeak, and Clara chuckled, her heart tightening with an overwhelming sense of connection. In that moment, the world outside the enclosure seemed to fade, leaving only this tiny, miraculous life and the delicate bond they shared. But even with progress, there were still moments of doubt. One evening, the mother bear refused to eat, curling protectively around her cub as though retreating inward. Clara watched helplessly as the veterinarians worked to coax her, their faces full of concern. "She's stressed," Elena said quietly, stepping back from the enclosure. "Even in a controlled environment, the trauma she's experienced can resurface." Clara felt a rush of frustration and sorrow. "What can we do?" "Give her time," Elena replied. "Keep doing what you're doing. Sometimes just being here makes all the difference." That night, Clara stayed by the enclosure, her voice low and soothing as she spoke to the bear. She shared stories of her childhood, her first encounters with wildlife, and the moments that shaped her love for nature. She wasn't sure if the bear understood, but by dawn the mother bear had begun to eat again, slowly but steadily. Weeks turned into months, and the mother bear's leg healed gradually. The stitches gave way to a faint scar, and she began testing her injured limb, moving with more ease. The cub's once fragile energy now pulsed with playful vigor, a stark contrast to the frailty Clara had first seen on the trail. Clara watched their progress with pride and humility, reminded of nature's incredible resilience and its ability to heal despite immense hardship. One crisp morning, Clara stood at the edge of the outdoor rehabilitation area, watching the bear and her cub explore the larger space. The cub clumsily pounced on a pile of leaves while the mother sniffed around the perimeter. It was their first time outside since arriving at the center, and Clara's throat tightened as she watched. Elena joined her, arms crossed, as they observed the bears. "They're almost ready." Clara turned to her, brow furrowed. "For release?" Elena nodded. "In a few more weeks we'll return them to their territory. They've come so far." Clara swallowed hard, emotions stirring within her. She knew this was the goal, returning them to the wild, but the thought of saying goodbye was bittersweet. That evening, Clara sat outside the enclosure, the stars overhead shimmering like distant lanterns. The mother bear lay on her side, the cub curled up against her. Clara watched them quietly, heart full. "You're almost there," she whispered, barely audible in the stillness. "You fought so hard, and you're going to make it." The bear let out a soft huff, eyes half closed but still aware. Clara smiled and leaned back against the cool earth. She had been part of their journey, a witness to their strength and vulnerability. Though saying goodbye would be difficult, she knew it was the right thing. "You've taught me so much," Clara murmured, her words almost a whisper in the night. "About trust, about resilience, about fighting for what matters." The bears lay still, their breathing slow and steady. Clara stayed by their side until the first light of dawn broke. The journey was nearing its end, but the bond they had formed would remain, a silent reminder of the connection between humans and the wild and the fragile, powerful beauty of life. The release day came sooner than Clara expected. The crisp autumn air smelled of pine, and the forest seemed to hum with anticipation. Clara stood by the transport truck, hands clasped in front of her. Nearby, Dr. Elena Ward and a small team of wildlife rangers were preparing the mother bear and her cub for their journey back to Lamar Valley. The mother bear had regained much of her strength. Though her leg still carried a faint scar, she moved with confidence, her protective instincts fully intact. The cub, once fragile, had grown into a lively, curious ball of fur darting between its mother's legs. "You've done incredible work," Elena said, resting a reassuring hand on Clara's shoulder. "They're ready?" Clara nodded, throat tight with emotion. "It's what they deserve." The drive to the release site was quiet. The truck rumbled over gravel roads winding through the park, and Clara sat in the back with the bears, her presence meant to calm them. She spoke softly to them, her voice steady despite the emotions swirling within her. "You're going home," she whispered, her gaze on the mother bear. "This is where you belong." The bear huffed softly, her dark eyes meeting Clara's for a fleeting moment. In that brief connection, Clara felt their bond, formed in desperation, nurtured through trust. When the truck finally stopped, Clara climbed out and took a deep breath. Lamar Valley stretched before her, golden meadows and distant hills bathed in the soft light of late afternoon. It was where their paths had first crossed, and it felt fitting that this would be where they returned. The rangers opened the crates and stepped back, giving the bears space. The mother bear emerged first, moving deliberately as she surveyed her surroundings. The cub followed closely behind, its small body trembling with excitement. Clara stood a few paces away, hands clenched at her sides. She wanted to rush forward, but she knew this moment wasn't hers to control. It belonged to the bears. The mother bear turned her massive head and locked eyes with Clara one last time. It was a fleeting moment, But Clara saw something like gratitude in her gaze, a silent acknowledgement of everything they had shared. With a low huff, the mother bear began walking, the cub scrambling to keep up. Clara watched as they disappeared into the trees, their silhouettes blending with the forest until they were gone. The group stood in silence, the weight of the moment settling in. Elena placed a hand on Clara's arm. "You did it," she said softly. "They're where they belong." Clara nodded, her chest tight. "It's not just about me. They're the ones who fought to survive. I was just lucky enough to be part of their journey." As the sun set behind the mountains, Clara lingered at the release site, her thoughts drifting. She thought about the mother bear's desperation that day on the trail, the fragile trust they had built, and the remarkable resilience that had carried them both through. Back at the rehabilitation center, life returned to its usual rhythm. But Clara felt different. The experience had deepened her commitment to conservation, strengthening her resolve to protect the delicate balance between humans and nature. Months later, Clara found herself thinking often of the bears, wondering how they were doing, if the cub had grown strong, if the mother still remembered the bond they shared. She took solace in the thought that their story was not just about survival, but about hope, trust, and the enduring connection between species. Though she would never see them again, Clara carried their story with her, a reminder of the profound beauty that exists in the wild and the responsibility we all share to protect it. Years later, on a crisp autumn morning, Clara returned to Lamar Valley. The sun cast long shadows over the meadows, and the scent of pine filled the air. As she walked along the trail, she spotted fresh tracks in the dirt, large paw prints accompanied by smaller ones. A smile spread across her face, her heart swelling with quiet joy. The bears had found their place in the wild, and in doing so, they had left their mark, not just on the land, but on Clara's life. Clara knelt by the tracks, fingers tracing the outlines. "You're still out there," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "right where you belong." Standing, she gazed out at the valley, golden and expansive, before her. With every step she took, steady and purposeful, Clara carried the bear's story within her, a reminder of the quiet strength of survival and the beauty of nature's resilience.